This episode is brought to you by 12 Pro Wrestling Rules for Life, written by my buddy Ben Nelson Creed. Available now on Amazon. Just type in 12 Pro Wrestling Rules for Life and it will pop up. I loved this book so much that I wrote the foreword for my good friend Ben Nelson Creed. Here's just a few of the words that I wrote in the foreword, because you see, I was jealous of my buddy Ben as soon as I read this book, and this is what I wrote in the foreword. I said, "So why am I so jealous of Ben? Here's why. Ben wrote this book." It's not just the fact that Ben wrote a book. I've been wanting to write a book for years, but never have. It's the fact that Ben wrote this book. In the last number of years, I've been reflecting on my life and everything that I've accomplished. And one thought has gone through my mind numerous times while I've been reflecting. So many of my successes are attributed to what I've learned within the professional wrestling business. Man, what a great idea for a book. If only I could get this idea down on paper, I could add another successful and worthwhile thing to my resume. Well, too late. Ben has already done it, and he's done an amazing job of it. Hence, my extreme jealousy. There's so many amazing takeaways in this book. Let me just tell you a few of the 12 Pro Wrestling Rules for Life. There's lesson number 5, which is learn to take your bumps. Or number 1 says work your gimmick. Number 9, master the fundamentals. And 12, work hard away from the spotlight. That's just a few of the 12 Pro Wrestling Rules for Life. If you want to learn more, I suggest very, very highly you buy this book now. Go to Amazon and type in 12 Pro Wrestling Rules for Life. If you do, here's what you'll get. You'll get a headlock on life. And the ebook version is cheaper than a beer and won't make you hungover. So go to Amazon now and pick up 12 Pro Wrestling Rules for Life by my buddy Ben Nelson Creed.
Wrestling is life. Wrestling is life. Wrestling is life is wrestling.
Welcome to another episode of Wrestling is Life is Wrestling with me, Cody Deaner. I am a professional wrestler. I'm a professional wrestling producer. I'm a professional traveling motivational speaker. I am a professional dad. I got 4 kids. They're all awesome, but I'm a pro at it. I'm also a professional husband, whatever that means. I guess my wife would say I'm a professional because she loves me and I love her so very, very much. She's being a wonderful mother to our children right now, letting me do this podcast, which I'm giving to you for free, which makes me not a professional podcaster, but I'm trying. And thank you to everybody out there who has been rating, reviewing, and subscribing to this podcast. You doing that helps me maybe accomplish my goal of being a professional podcaster where I can start to make some money at this. I'm making some money over at patreon.com/Cody Deaner. Thank you so much to my patrons. You can be a patron right now. Head on over to patreon.com/Cody Deaner and see all the content that I'm putting up there almost daily. I'm trying to be good to my patrons, and some of the content that is behind the scenes, never before seen stuff that I will not be putting on my social media. It's only going to be going to my patrons, including this whole episode that you're going to hear right now, early and ad free, as well as part 2, next week's episode. It's already up there right now, including an exclusive bonus story from today's guest. You can also support me by going to prowrestlingtees.com/Cody Deaner, get some merch over there, or get a cameo for me over at cameo.com/Cody Deaner. For anyone that has been supporting me over the last number of weeks, thank you. If you haven't been supporting me financially, but you've just been listening to this podcast, I want to say thank you. And thank you for those of that have been taking screenshots and uploading it to their social media and tagging me at Cody Deaner to help me spread the word about what I'm doing here. And what I'm doing here is trying to help people by giving them some life lessons from me and my buddies, my successful professional wrestling friends. Episodes 1, 2, 3, and 4 were part 1 and 2 with Josh Alexander and Rosemary. I've got nothing but wonderful feedback from those episodes. I actually want to read some feedback that I got from my episodes with Rosemary. This was a comment put on YouTube. You can watch this show at Cody Deaner Podcast on YouTube. And I just want to read a comment from Rockstar PWG UK. They said this: I've been captivated. This whole concept, it's easy and insightful listening to kickstart my day, and it's helping keep me on a positive wave, which is something I'm trying harder to focus on each and every day. Rockstar PWG UK, thank you for that wonderful comment. And I am so happy that this podcast is helping keep you on a positive wave. That is something that I wanted from the very beginning. Why I even started this podcast was I thought that my guests could help people in some way by sharing their story, their journey, and the life lessons that they have learned themselves in their journey. Because I've known this for years, I just decided to put this in podcast form. I have known that wrestling is life, is wrestling. So thank you for listening. Thank you for commenting. Please drop me a review or comment somewhere, wherever you're listening to this podcast, and I will be happy to read such glowing, wonderful reviews on this podcast in the future. So that's enough of me. Let's talk about today's guest. Today's guest is Joe Hendry. You will learn quickly in our conversation. I've worked with Joe in various capacities at Impact Wrestling. You can catch both me and Joe on Impact Wrestling each and every week on Thursdays on Access TV and the Fight Network in Canada, as well as a whole bunch of other channels worldwide. Joe Hendry is one of the amazing performers that you will see on Impact Wrestling, and he's become a friend of mine. I quickly wanted to become friends with Joe simply because, well, one, he's a really cool guy, which you're going to hear from. Two, he's a very interesting guy, which you're going to learn today. And he's successful. He's a thoughtful and successful person. He's successful because he's so insightful and he thinks strategically through his lives and through his life. And well, life's plural, I guess. This guy has lived many lives, which you're also going to learn from this conversation. This guy has done so many things. He's not just a professional wrestler. He actually did amateur wrestling. He was in the British Commonwealth Games. Let me just make sure I'm getting this information correct here. This guy is a black belt in judo. He was in the 2018 Commonwealth Games representing Team Scotland. And he also went to the British Senior National Championships in Greco-Roman wrestling. He's a very accomplished musician, and that's before we even talk about his wrestling accomplishments. I mean, this guy has done it all. Since he hasn't actually been in wrestling super long time, but the amount of time that he's been in wrestling, he's made the most of it. He's done some really cool things. You might be familiar with him in ICW. He was a tag team champion there, or at Defiant Wrestling, formerly known as What Culture Pro Wrestling. Then you also might have followed him to Ring of Honor, where he did some cool stuff in ROH, or you know him like I know him through Impact Wrestling. All you have to do is say his name and he appears. He's already had amazing successes in Impact Wrestling. He is the longest reigning digital media champion since that belt has come into existence in Impact Wrestling. So that's me putting over my buddy. I told him I was going to do that, so I'm doing that for my buddy Joe. You deserve it, Joe, because you are awesome. This is part one of my conversation with Joe Hendry. I know that you're going to get a lot out of it. I know I did. I wasn't expecting to get as much myself out of these conversations with my friends. I was hoping that my listeners would get something out of it. But man, did I get so much out of this first part of my conversation with Joe Hendry. There'll be a cliffhanger at the end here of part one, which will lead to part two of my conversation with Joe next week. But let's not worry about next week. Let's think about and focus on this week and this amazing conversation with my buddy, Joe Hendry. Thank you for doing this, man. I very much appreciate this. I appreciate your time very much. I'm not going to give you the typical podcast introduction where I put you over for 30 seconds as an introduction. I did that already in the
Yeah,
intro.
you've already buried me, so why break tradition? You know what I mean?
When did I bury you? Oh, on your show.
Yeah.
Oh, you want to bring that up right away? I buried you.
I was like, he's not mad about. I couldn't tell from your messages if you were mad about that, leaving that in. I thought it was like funny.
Oh, I did too. I was hoping that I knew you'd take it that way. But I thought.
I thought when you brought it up, I was like, he shoot mad at me for leaving it in. I was like,
no, not at all. Not at all. I was hoping you'd leave it in, and then we would have a conversation very much like we're having right now about it later. But I just was very surprised that they picked that as the clip to put out on all of social media.
Hey, after that was on our social media guy. I didn't actually pick that, but gotcha. After everything I've said about the Impact Wrestling roster, listen, if anyone needs to just take their medicine, it's me. You know what I mean?
Gotcha. So if anyone listening to this right now doesn't know what we're talking about Joe Hendry's awesome show called Food Fight, where the amazing company of Impact Wrestling buys food, and then we get to eat it and then chat. So I was a recent guest on Joe's Food Fight, and I had a blast on it. There was a very funny moment in it and a really good conversation. We won't go through exactly what it was. You got to go check it out. You got to go see that. And remind me to plug all your stuff, Joe, because I've done a couple of these interviews so far, and I always forget because we just kind of get enraptured in our conversation that I don't let my guests plug their stuff enough. So we're starting with the plug right now. Joe Hendry's Food Fight.
I appreciate it.
Good. And I want to we'll end up talking about that a little bit more later, but this is Wrestling is Life is Wrestling with Cody Deaner, and we're going to have a lot of wrestling fans listening to this, but we're also going to have a lot of non-wrestling fans listening to this, people that are just interested in hearing from interesting people and the decisions that they've made in their life to achieve their goals and become successful people. And I made a list of guys that I wanted to interview and talk to because I felt that they had a really interesting story, not because of their wrestling story, but because of their life story. And I made a list of a bunch of people, and you were one of the guys that was at the top of my list. Awesome. I listened to you talk to Tommy Dreamer on his House of Hardcore podcast, and there's a lot of things that I learned about you through that podcast that really blew my mind. And I had a whole bunch of questions that popped into my mind, and I wanted to dig deeper into some of those things that you didn't necessarily go super deep into with him, but just mentioned. And it was like, okay, that is fascinating. So I'm hoping that we can dive into some of those things.
Hell yeah. Nothing's off limits. Go for it.
Great. So let's start from the beginning, just so that both myself and our audience can kind of get to know who you are. Actually, you know what? Let's not start there. I want to start with this. Do you remember when we first met? Do you remember? Is there a memory that comes to mind for you when you and I first met?
Oh man, I'm going to get buried here or something.
No, not at all. I'm just curious. I just like to give the audience like a kind of a background of why we're even talking and why you'd even agree to talk to me. You know, what's our connection?
I'm worried I've missed some eventful moment here. I actually had a job interview just like this one time, where I did the job interview, killed it. And they had like one of the staff members show us around the entire workplace and go, and at the end, the guy doing the interview went, and the person that showed you around, what was their name? And I was like, you piece of. I couldn't remember. So
No.
That was the one job I didn't get. So I'm going to fail this as well. But
there's no right answer to this because there's no right or wrong answer. I'm just your first memory and recollection of me. And so you could bury me right now if you need to or want to.
So now let's be honest. We do get dropped on our heads for a living. So we can be forgiven for forgetting little details. But I remember the first, let's say this is how I'm going to sidestep that one. The first meaningful interaction I can remember.
That's what I'm looking for, actually.
Yes. When you agented my first match in Impact, right?
Yes.
Am I right in saying that? And actually, you have a trait that I like a lot that not a lot of people have, which when you are asked a question or you are given a piece of information, most people just talk, whereas you go, and you're not afraid to pause, think, and then answer. That's a very good trait. That's something I noticed.
So two things just happened in that answer, Joe. One, you did not bury me. You put me over and talked about a positive trait of me. So I appreciate that. And two, you answered that question the same way I would have answered that.
I was worried I met you in like 2016 or something.
No, and maybe we did, but
maybe.
I've had this experience where I've gone up to people and shook their hand and said, "Nice to meet you," and I've wrestled them before.
Dude, I had a situation at the last tapings where, do you know, there's a podcaster called Dennis. His second name escapes me for now, but he was backstage at Impact in 2018. Now, there's a guy backstage at Impact the other day called Nate, I believe he's called, and he looks exactly like Dennis. So I thought he was Dennis, and I thought he was faving me this entire time. And at the last tapings, I shoved him and went, "Hey!" And it's a different guy. So I just shoved some poor random guy. So Nate, I apologize. I had to just, that was an awkward one. But anyway, sorry. Carry on.
No, now you're making me remember a very random memory of when I was a child, when I was in a mall shopping with my grandparents, and there was a man leaning over, picking up a toy, and I jumped on his back because I thought it was my grandpa, and it totally wasn't my grandpa. It was some random stranger that I jumped on. So I've been doing things like that since I was a little kid. So I empathize with that. But no, I remember helping produce an Agent Your First Match, and it was one of the first matches that I produced that I remember feeling really excited about, because I was excited for you, because I've been in that situation before and know the importance of making a first impression. And I've made a number of first impressions throughout my career, and then had advice given to me from some amazing people in the wrestling business. One in particular that I remember that I was applying when I was helping put together your debut match with you was Dutch Mantell, who is just a phenomenal talent. He's referenced by so many wrestlers, including Stone Cold Steve Austin, as someone who kind of helped them and mold their thinking about wrestling. And when I debuted in TNA, one of the things that he told me, this is back in 2009, he said, "This is your debut. You don't get a second chance at a first impression. So this is your shot." And that's a cliche phrase, but it's so true. If you need to make your impact, pun intended, in a very specific way. And we're starting to build something here right off the hop. What are we going to choose to build, and how are we going to go from there? So, I mean, that's good life advice, I think, whether we're talking, right? Whether we're talking about a job interview, like you were just saying, or a debut on national television. Yeah,
I completely agree. And I didn't realize how important first impressions and debuts were. They're everything. Like, I mean, my Ring of Honor debut was horrible, right? Oh my god. So I remember, and hey, I think there were, let's just say there were multiple factors at play here, right? So it's just, it is what it is. Maybe the booking could have been different. Maybe I could have done something different. Maybe my opponent could have done something different. But I was debuting against Dalton Castle, who was, despite being a heel at the time, let's be honest, was an over babyface.
Absolutely.
I walk out, never having got over in America before, and management thought, and I stupidly thought I was going to get a babyface reaction. Walked out, and it was like, "You suck!" Like, just one guy in the back, just one guy on the top floor. "You suck!" And it took me about 6 months to fight back from that and start to get over it. And I remember we did one loop, reactions weren't good. I was worried for my job at one point. Second loop, we're starting to get over it, and then the pandemic comes. So that was an interesting experience. But I learned from that, and I was like, I will never do that again. So I learned from having a poor debut. And you know what? I was very, I couldn't have asked for a better debut, because listen, one thing that I think you're great at doing, this is disgusting putting you over this much. This is already, it's uncomfortable here. But the thing I really like about when you as an agent is it's very rare that you say no. You will go, "What about?" and you'll incorporate the idea and tweak it, and it becomes a collaborative process. Whereas there are other times it just feels like a no, and there's not another place to go with it. So is you've got an agent who understands what the objective is, and also I can't put over Jason Hotch enough. Like, he is such a goddamn good worker, and he made me look like $1 million. So, and again, it was the night after the big pay-per-view as well. And actually, we might be pulling the curtain back a little bit here, but I came back from that match. So we had the pay-per-view match number 1. Now, maybe as an agent, this will provide you with some pride. The night after, I was on a very short-term deal. The night I came back from that, literally came back through the curtain, and they told me, we're tearing up your deal and you're getting a long-term deal.
Oh, awesome. That makes me very happy to hear that. I didn't know that. I'm learning something here. It
was on the spot.
Amazing. Well, that means you nailed it, and you did exactly what needed to be done, as you made that good first impression. Now, let me put you over here, Joe, because
I hate it. I just
okay.
hate it.
I love how we're starting this. We'll bury each other later.
We have to.
We'll start high and then we'll dip down.
Yeah.
I feel like one thing that I noticed was a lot of guys get really, really nervous in their debut because you've thought about it so much, right? This is such a big moment. You maybe thought about it too much over and over again, all the things that you want to do. So then you have this idea in your mind because it's your career, it's your business, it's your brand, which is different about professional wrestling, right? You're taking your brand and you're teaming up with another brand, in this case, Impact Wrestling. And you want to do what's right for their brand, but you also have to do what's right for yours as well. So you have these ideas of how you want to be presented and feel you should be presented. And you're thinking about it so much because it's your business, right? This is your business and your brand. So in that situation, as a producer, I found a lot of people get very much set in their ways, and they know exactly what they want it to be and what they need to do. So when I give I just call it, like, I'm a fly in the wall. I'm not here to tell you you can't do this and you have to do this, unless it's something from the office that says, hey, these are some certain ground rules that you can't break, of course. But other than that, wrestling is very subjective. So what ends up happening is I offer some advice, and you get a lot of yeah buts in wrestling. And you didn't yeah but me once. If I stopped, like you said, and thought, and then gave you some feedback and advice, you then likewise did the same and took in that information instead of just going, nope, I've already set in stone what I need to do. You know what I'm saying? And that's a very good quality to have that a lot of guys don't have. Just taking advice is not a quality that a lot of wrestlers have, but I think a lot of humans in general in life have a hard time taking advice from people. So maybe that can lead to where I want to really start, which is you as a kid. Where did you grow up? Because I'm wondering where that quality came from, this idea of taking advice. Was that something that you've always been like as a kid and where you grew up, or is that something you developed over time?
It's so, oh man, how long you got, dude? Because
as long as you got, man.
Yeah. So the thing is, I was actually a very timid child, very timid. And then in a weird way, everything that I've done has been a learned behavior to get me to this point, and it is almost subconscious, but it's crazy when you look at it. So I basically went through a bunch of skills piece by piece that led me to this point. It was almost like subconsciously, this is where I wanted to go, but didn't for quite a long time for whatever reason. So I was a very timid child. I was quite small, actually, for quite a while. It was weird. It wasn't until I was about 17 that I just sort of, filled out. But yeah, I didn't have a ton of confidence, socially and things like that. But something that always did come naturally to me, this is weird. The one time that I wasn't kind of anxious or nervous was speaking publicly. And I don't understand that. That doesn't really make sense to me. I actually am one of these people, I have an extroverted side of my personality, and that's what the audience sees. But actually, when the audience doesn't see me, I'm very introverted. I'm an overthinker. There's a lot on my mind at all times. But what's weird is when I am at peace, it is when I am on the microphone, and it has been that way since I was 3 years old. At my third birthday party, I made a speech. So it's
Wow.
it's weird. When I was about 12. Maybe about that age. So actually, no, I'll start when I was 6. My mum's friend knew some people who they ran a judo club, so they suggested, why doesn't he give this a go? And I hated judo, hated it, but it's the type of thing I hated the idea of it. But when I got there on the mats, I started to enjoy it. And actually, I kind of owe so much of what I've done to judo, which will become apparent in a moment. So I did that at 12. I started like this Saturday acting class at 15. So through the acting class, I got like this audition, and it turned out the audition was for a musical act and not an actor. And we were like, well, let's just make a band. So me and my cousin made a band. We ended up getting on TV, did this horrible music performance, because obviously you can't really make a band in a week. But, we did that, and then I just decided to keep going with the music thing. And I had this weird dual life where I was everybody had left my high school in 5th year, which is what we call it, which is when you're kind of like 17. So I was the only 18, like the only person in my year of my friend group that was left. So I switched school for the last year. And then, so I'm in this school. I've basically got no friends. I've got acquaintances. And I was living this weird double life where I was an absolute nobody at school, but I was literally playing in clubs with my band until like 2 a.m. on a Sunday night.
And we're going to take a quick break to help me try to make some money by shilling some products to you. But I'm not going to shill some products alone. I brought a very special guest on right now to help me sell some things to you, and that is my son, whose name is?
Abel.
And he is how many years old?
16.
You are not 16. You have to be honest with my listeners. Tell them your real age. Yes, you are 9. You don't wish you were 16, though, do you?
Yeah.
Oh, man.
Then I can't get my driving license.
Okay, that's true. You can start driving, but you don't want to grow up, dude. Trust me. You want to be 9 forever. And then you can just jump on your trampoline and do backflips every day, all day in the sunshine. Being 9 is the best ever, even if you don't feel it.
Yeah, but some 9-year-olds can't do backflips on the trampoline.
Yeah, I know, but you can because you're special. You can do a backflip, can't you?
Yeah.
You can do I've seen you do 10 in a row, or at least 3.
5.
5?
Yeah.
We got to work up to 10.
Okay,
we'll work up to 10 backflips. You're way more athletic than me. I can't do a backflip on a trampoline if my life depended on it. But you can do it, no problem, can't you? Yeah. Okay, so I want to sell some things to my listeners right now. I want to sell them either a t-shirt from prowrestlingtees.com/Cody Deaner. I want to sell them on being a patron from patreon.com/Cody Deaner, where they can get exclusive behind-the-scenes content, all kinds of cool stuff over there, so go check that out. Or they can get a special video from me at cameo.com/Cody Deaner, and I can do a sweet video for them. I think they should go to prowrestlingtees.com/Cody Deaner and get a t-shirt. You've got a pretty cool t-shirt on right now. What is it?
Hulk Hogan.
Hogan's Beach Shop t-shirt. Is it tie-dye?
Yeah.
Is that your favorite shirt?
Mm-hmm.
I can tell. It looks like you've worn it every day for the last 3 years.
Yeah.
I got that for you in Florida at Hogan's Beach Shop from Clearwater.
Mm-hmm.
Am I the best dad in the world?
Mm-hmm.
See, now you're being honest with my listeners. I appreciate that. Are you not only really good at backflips, but you're also a comedian?
Yeah.
Can you tell me a joke?
Okay, so. Knock, knock.
Who's there?
Boo.
Boo-hoo.
Don't cry. It's just a joke.
Oh, man, the crowd liked that one. Very much so. Now, they're asking for an encore right now. Encore. That means they want another joke. Can you do another joke?
Yeah, sure.
All right. All right, give us another one.
Okay. Knock knock.
Who's there?
Granny he.
Granny he who?
I didn't know you could yodel.
Abel, I appreciate you coming on here and being honest with me and being the coolest 9-year-old that I know and telling people about your backflips. If people want to advertise, maybe we can do this again. If people want to advertise, they can actually go to what? What's my email? It's right there on the page. What's that say?
Ads at CodyDeaner.com.
Should a company email that address?
Yeah.
Should they advertise their product on this podcast?
Mm-hmm.
If they do, are you going to help me sell the product?
Yeah.
You're going to tell the world how awesome the product is?
Yep.
Well, they'll have to send the product to us for free so that we can use it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's cool. We'll get products, we'll use them, and then we'll be honest with the world and tell them if they're good or not. Yeah?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Because that's what we do in this family. We're honest. Can I be honest with you right now?
Yep.
I love you.
I love you too.
Oh, thanks, buddy. Can you say bye to my listeners?
Bye. Wait.
Oh, wait. You want to say something else?
One more joke.
Oh, another joke? You want to do
Yes.
3 jokes?
Yes.
Oh, man. I don't even know if I should let you do this right now.
Okay.
It better be good.
So let me think.
You just asked me to do a 3rd joke and you don't even have one in mind?
Wait, one sec. Shh, shh, shh. I'm trying to think of the ones in my knock knock joke book, but what's a good one?
See how long this is right now?
Okay, never mind. Bye.
Oh, man.
I was living this weird double life where I was an absolute nobody at school, but I was literally playing in clubs with my band until like 2 a.m. on a Sunday night. You know, I remember having these experiences and it was amazing. I played with open for famous bands the night before school, you know, and we got really close. We had like, you know, meetings with Sony and stuff like that. And, you know, I remember I'd always wanted to be a wrestler, but I just didn't think I was big enough. And it just got to a point where something wasn't working. I thought, you know, maybe I was meant to be a sports entertainer. Maybe I wasn't meant to be a musician. But the interesting thing is all the skills that I accumulated along the way helped me progress my career. Because I'm a great believer in that, like, obviously repetitions is what makes you great. But my viewpoint was if I can use my music to get me to big matches quicker. So to give you an example, on the 3rd anniversary of my debut, I wrestled Kurt Angle. So I'm thinking if I can use my music to get to that point quickly, surely I'm going to learn more from wrestling Kurt Angle than, you know, the people in my training school. So I did that. I took a small break in wrestling. I don't know if you want to get into this now or later, but I did have a small period where I was doing amateur wrestling, which is a sport I started pretty late in life.
Yeah, man. There is so much that you just said that I want to dive into.
Yeah, sorry, man. You need to cut me off. I'm gonna.
No, I don't want to.
Don't get me talking. It'll never stop.
I'm the exact same way when I'm on the other side. When I'm in your position, I continue and I go on and go on. I just made like 5 notes just in what you just said and things that I want to jump into. But one of the first things you said that I think is really interesting, and I also think helpful to some of our listeners is there's people out there that limit themselves because they're introverted and because there's a lot of, I guess, stereotypes associated with being an introvert. And a lot of people just think, oh, I'm introverted, so I'm shy and I'm just going to keep to myself and I'll do these things away from public eye. And that's just the way I am. So then they end up, they limit themselves.
Mm-hmm.
I can 1,000% relate to what you're saying because I'm the exact same way. I didn't know that I was an introvert with extroverted tendencies until about 5 years ago. And then I looked back at my childhood and realized, oh, very much like yourself, at a family gathering when I was 6 years old, instead of mingling with the kids and just chatting with them, I found some balloons and made balloon animals for them. And I put on a show. right? So I was more comfortable putting on a show for these people than chatting with them. And I read an article a couple years ago, 23 ways you know you're an introvert, and I was all 23 of them.
Wow.
Every single one. And I had no idea, because everybody told me throughout my life that I was an extroverted person. But when I got into certain social situations, I didn't feel that way. And I was always overthinking it. Exactly like you said, very, thinking things through and all of that. I can relate to all of that.
Yeah.
And one of the traits of an introvert is you would rather be on a microphone speaking to 300 people than at a social gathering where you have to chat with 13 people. And I can 100% relate to that.
Yeah.
So I find that very interesting.
Yeah. You almost feel like you're covert, you're almost like they have no idea. And I don't think people do. Like I wonder sometimes, it's identified with when I was talking about when you pause to answer questions. I wish I did that sometimes more, because sometimes out of anxiety, I'll just kind of blurt out the first thing in my mind and say something dumb. And it's weird. I sometimes think, am I overthinking everything or a little nervous here? But I can completely empathize with everything you're saying as well. Especially again, when I was a kid, I was the same, like doing these little performances and stuff like that. And I didn't really realize that was a thing. I think, it's a struggle, I think, for people who are that way, because I'm going to bring it back. I'm sorry, I've just realized I've said a bunch of nothing. I've just been doing what politicians do. It's like when they run down the time and say nothing.
No, man.
I think it
comes from. It's fine.
I think it relates back to the idea that courage is, you have to be afraid for there to be courage. Courage is you're afraid, but you do it anyway. And I kind of think that all the things that I do in my life that would fall into that extroverted category fall under that category. I have to be honest, I'm terrified every time I wrestle. I'm terrified every fight I've had for, an amateur wrestling or judo or whatever. Terrified before every gig I had as a musician. Just really, amped up about it and want it to go well, but you do it anyway, right? And then when the music hits, you go out and you execute your business,
Yes, I think that's so helpful for anyone listening to this right now. A lot of people are listening to this and they want to know all the wrestling tidbits, and we're talking about wrestling as we also talk about life, so they're gonna like it. But there's people out there that can't relate to the wrestling stuff because they're not in the wrestling business. But what they can relate to is they have something that they're scared of. They have a fear associated with something that they have to try to overcome. And there's no magic formula and answer to, well, here's how you overcome that. You just have to throw yourself into it and learn something from that. Like you said, if you can't even display courage unless there's fear. And just because you've done something a bunch of times, like you've wrestled a bunch of matches, doesn't mean that you don't get scared before every single match. I'm still nervous and apprehensive before every match that I have. And I've been doing it for 23 years. Yeah. So if you're somebody that's, constantly thinking that, I'm too scared, I can't do it, just know that some of your favorite performers and actors and wrestlers and musicians have the exact same feeling before they hit the stage and do the thing that you love.
We're all human beings. We're all more similar than people think. I think sometimes.
Absolutely.
I think sometimes you see people on TV or, in concerts or movies or whatever, and sometimes the only difference is that they just took the leap and did it. Mm-hmm. In my view, I think that if I think about what got me to this point, and I don't mean to sound arrogant when I say this, because I think I'm going to talk about something that people think is inherent, but I think it's learned. Intelligence. I think you have to work on your intelligence. I didn't read books until a few years ago. I'm a little behind on it now. I need to get back into it, but I spent a year in COVID reading like a new book every couple of weeks, and that changed my life. That was the biggest jump in personal development I ever had. But I think intelligence is one of the absolute key factors that you need to make it, and you can work on that. There are so many different ways that you can develop your intelligence. There are different types of intelligence. There's emotional intelligence. There's so many different types of intelligence. Figure out what your strengths are and develop them. That's one thing. Another thing I think you have to have is honesty. You have to be good enough. You have to be honest enough with yourself to know when you've done something that was good and when you did something that sucked. You need to know when to listen. You need to know the difference between good advice and bad advice, but you need to have an awareness. You need to be paying attention, and you need to know when things have worked and when they haven't worked. So if you have intelligence and you have the ability to know when you did something that worked or didn't work, and then you multiply that with an unrelenting work ethic, to me, those three qualities, anybody can do pretty much anything. And that's that. There may be some caveats or whatever, but those to me are the building blocks.
This is why I wanted you on my show, Joe. What you just dropped on us was such good advice and exactly what I was hoping I could get out of this podcast, being wrestling is life is wrestling. You've learned so much of those life lessons through the wrestling business. And I don't think wrestling gets enough credit for the things that it can teach us, the things we can learn from that. And I also don't think a lot of us wrestlers get enough credit for being intelligent guys. I think the average person thinks that we're all just a bunch of meatheads that don't think about these things that you're bringing up. And man, you just dropped some good knowledge that I think is applicable to anybody, not just wrestling fans.
Oh yeah, any endeavor.
What came first? Your love of wrestling or your love of music? Because that was another thing that I really want to dive into, because I'm also a musician, so it fascinates me. You mentioned that you got thrown into judo, and then all of a sudden you were doing acting, and then the acting thing it was actually more of a band, so then you were in a band. Did all of that come before you were introduced to wrestling? Was your musical love first?
So I've always had a love of entertaining and performance. I think that's always what I've wanted to do. I was aware of wrestling because my cousins had Sky Sports, and in the UK, that's what you needed to have to watch WWE. I eventually got here in the UK. I don't know how it was in the States, but in the UK, we had Channel 22 was Cartoon Network, and it would change into whatever. I would change it. What's Turner's network name? Is it Turner or?
Turner TBS.
Yeah, whatever it was whatever the UK equivalent was. Okay. Cartoon Network at 9 p.m. would switch into that, and it'd be like, oh my god, it was like you'd hacked the TV, and nice. And WCW would come on. And I remember I had is babysitter an American word? Would you say that?
Yep.
Yeah. So I remember when I was a young kid, I had a babysitter, and I remember telling her like, yeah. I was like, WWS fake, but WCW is 10% real. Like those words came out of my mouth.
Amazing.
Yeah, just talking absolute nonsense. So I saw that, and it's weird. This is how good a heel Ric Flair is. I remember not one thing about professional wrestling from my childhood other than I hate that old guy that's always on every week. I hate him. That's all I can remember. And Ric Flair went on to become, probably my second favorite wrestler ever. Mm-hmm. Probably the wrestler that might have even influenced me the most. But that's the only memory I have of wrestling as a kid, because I just didn't have it. So I'm actually one of these people that got into wrestling through the video games. So there was like a kind of after school club you would go to if your parents worked late, and during the summer holidays and stuff, I went there, and one of the kids brought in their PlayStation, and I think Warzone was my first taste of professional wrestling. And I was more interested in creating wrestlers and creating characters than the actual matches themselves. The creative side of it was always what appealed to me. So I was just constantly creating characters. I remember I got SmackDown and SmackDown 2. And I remember I had so much fun with that because I was so into movies at the time, and I would put all the movie characters in the game. In fact, I remember making Jules and Vincent Vega from Pulp Fiction in SmackDown 2, having them as like my main tag team. I was like, yeah, it's Vincent Vega's going over for the titles tonight. He's going to have a run. He's going to have a run.
How old were you? How old were you when you were doing this?
So here's the thing. I saw Pulp Fiction way too young, man. I saw Pulp Fiction when I was 12. Okay. And it's been my favorite. It was immediately my favorite film, which is odd.
I was allowed to watch. I was allowed to watch whatever I wanted to when I was young. So that doesn't surprise me.
It's a thing. Yeah. And what's weird about it though is I really like structure. I like structured stories. I like things that have a beginning and a middle and an end. And all the things that I think make a good story or a good song or a good match, every single one of those things go out the window with Pulp Fiction. Another one of my favorite films is behind me, The Dark Knight, which also you can argue does not have a set act 1, act 2, act 3 structure. Again, look at Fight Club as well. It's weird. Isn't that weird how sometimes the rules that we apply to the things that we like, the things that you like the most, can sometimes throw the rule book out the window. But
I think what's interesting about that is, if you're going to tell a story and learn how to be a good storyteller, you have to learn the structure first before you can throw things out the window, because you don't even know you're throwing something out the window and throwing a wrench into it unless you learn the structure first. It's cool that you just started talking about stories, because that was going to be something I wanted to bring up when you were talking about creating these characters. Is you sound like a storyteller to me. As you were young, you were drawn to stories, because I was too. I wasn't getting stories through the video games, because I'm a little bit older than you, and my first video game, would have been on the Nintendo, and you can't create players on that. But for me, it was action figures. I would set up these tournaments, and I'd put all my LJN figures in brackets, and I'd create these wrestling tournaments, and I'm essentially creating a pay-per-view and all of these storylines. And that's what was getting my mind racing and into it so much, was the story element of it.
I'm the exact same. Whenever I would play with figures, it would be like these epic stories over 3 hours. You know what I mean? I'd have these arcs for all these different characters. I'll tell you something, man. I'm going to admit this right now. I remember when I gave up playing with toys, it did not feel right. I did not feel ready to give up playing with toys, but all my friends had stopped playing with toys, and I was like, I guess I got to stop playing with toys. You know what I mean? I don't know when the natural time would have been, but I guess I had to stop at some point. But it did not feel right. Did not feel right.
I'm going to out my brother right now. My younger brother, he played with his action figures well into his teenage years. He was like in high school, and he was very much like in a senior in high school, still playing with them. And I don't think he told his friends that he was doing it, but he also became a storyteller, loved wrestling, and he became an English teacher and used all of those passions in his career later. So I don't think, he needed to give that up.
I saw this hilarious, it was on a podcast, and I'd hate to be that guy that just like tells a funny story that someone else said on a podcast, but I'm going to cite it. I wish I could remember who it was. Okay. But he was talking about how late he gave up playing with wrestling action figures. And he was saying by the time he gave up wrestling action figures, he'd already started smoking. So he was saying, like, he's good. He's good. Yeah, I think I'm going to put Mankind over for the title tonight.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. So a lot of us, yourself and me, we play with action figures. We get into the video games. We fall in love with professional wrestling. And then the majority of people that are like that never have the audacity to think that they can do it themselves and step into a wrestling ring and be a professional wrestler. What made you make that decision and leap in your brain to go, no, I'm going to actually try and do this thing?
Because I needed to not lose everything. Like, I still had family and stuff like that, but I needed to lose what I perceived to be everything at the time.
That will wrap up part 1 with my conversation with my friend Joe Hendry. I told you there was going to be a cliffhanger. Man, what is Joe talking about in terms of kind of having to lose it all? Well, we'll continue this conversation next week in part 2 of my conversation with the amazing, wonderful, and lovely Joe Hendry. I told you guys you're going to get something from this. If you got something from today's episode, please let me know exactly what it was. Let Joe know what it was, because I know Joe, he's such a likable and thoughtful guy, like I said at the beginning of this podcast, and I'm sure you got that from him from this conversation that we had, and he'd love to hear your feedback too. So you can follow Joe Hendry at Joe Hendry on all socials. Put what you learned today from this episode and tag Joe in it at Joe Hendry. Tag me at Cody Deaner. Take a screenshot of this podcast that you're listening to right now, Wrestling is Life is Wrestling with Cody Deaner. Put it out into the world. Spread the love. Spread your knowledge of this podcast so that whatever you got from this episode, you share that with your friends. Your friends will come and listen to this podcast, and they'll get something from it too. all the feedback that I've got from this podcast so far over the last number of weeks since starting out on this adventure has been nothing short of amazing and really mind-blowing for me. I know that sounds like I'm blowing it things out of proportion and, just really exaggerating, but I'm not. I'm not exaggerating. The feedback that I've got has been so wonderful. And I said this a couple of weeks ago. I know that I don't have the largest audience in the world. My fan base isn't millions and millions and millions and millions of people. However, my fan base is loyal and loving. Honestly, I've got such positive feedback from everybody, and it's so nice to see. Please share this with a friend. Also, let people know that they can support me. You can support me by going to patreon.com/Cody Deaner. You can be just level 0. That's just a casual fan. That just means you throw me a couple bucks because you liked this episode, you like this podcast, you want to support me and throw me a couple bucks. Go do that at level 0. Or you can jump to level 1. You can be a mark for this podcast. And that's going to get you a whole bunch of exclusive content, including early and ad-free episodes of this. You want to listen to part 2 and you don't want to wait till next week with Joe Hendry, you can listen to it now over at patreon.com/Cody Deaner. Or you can be a smart mark, because you see, smart marks, they're just a little bit smarter than the marks. And those people at that level over at patreon.com/Cody Deaner are going to get a bonus story, some bonus insight and life advice from my buddy Joe. You're going to want to listen to that bonus content because I got a lot out of that from my buddy Joe. You can get that now by being a smart mark over at patreon.com/Cody Deaner. Or you want to go the extra mile. You want to be a Deaner Maniac Mega Mark and get merch shipped out to you each and every month exclusively from me, autographs from me, whole bunch of Q&A exclusive content. You want to be a Deaner Maniac Mega Mark, you can do that too. That helps me bring this podcast to you for free each and every week. You want a t-shirt? Go to prowrestlingtees.com/Cody Deaner. You want a cameo personal video from me? Go to cameo.com/Cody Deaner. You can watch this on YouTube. Share it with a friend. Share the YouTube. It's at Cody Deaner Podcast on YouTube. I know when I started this, I decided I was going to do video as well because some people like to watch this rather than just listen to it. So if you've listening to this and you want to go back and watch it, that helps my YouTube numbers as well. I need more subscribers on there. So rate, review, subscribe on your podcast platform and subscribe on YouTube. That helps my numbers immensely. That is going to bring us to the end of another episode of Wrestling is Life is Wrestling with Cody Deaner and with my buddy Joe Hendry. Next week, we will hear the conclusion of my conversation with Joe Hendry. And I know that you're going to get a lot out of it because you got a lot out of this episode. So did I. That brings us to the end of another episode of my podcast, which you guys are supporting, and I appreciate so much. Thank you guys for listening to Wrestling is Life is Wrestling with me, Cody Deaner. We'll see you next week.
Wrestling is life. Wrestling is life. Wrestling is life is wrestling.